The Founding Fathers made an appropriate choice when they selected the bald eagle as the emblem of the nation. The fierce beauty and the proud independence of this great bird aptly symbolizes the strength and freedom of America. But after watching today's video, you'll be left in deep thought as to why the moose should be the national animal of the greatest nation on earth. After all, it was a dead moose that saved a young America from a death blow. And the mastermind behind this was none other than the sage of Monticello, Thomas Jefferson. Today, Thomas Jefferson is known as the father of the Declaration of Independence of the United States of America. He, however, had a lot on his hands and was bestowed with a number of fancy titles as a result. Besides being the author of the Declaration of Independence, he was the governor of Virginia, the U.S. ambassador to France, the Secretary of the State, and our third president. He was also a gifted paleontologist, philosopher, archaeologist, and inventor. But one of Jefferson's greatest passions was an odd one. Jefferson loved to measure things. He designed a clock that marked the hour, minute, and even the day of the week, a rarity back then. He recorded what time the frogs croaked every day. He measured how fast he walked. Sometimes he would even stop his walks to measure the diameter of a tree trunk or a mule's height. You see, Jefferson was obsessed with sizes, and this obsession would eventually come in handy one day. When Jefferson was ousted from his home in Monticello by the British during the American Revolutionary War, he retired from the governorship of Virginia and threw himself into writing, publishing his own book in 1785 in which he recorded all these measurements that we just mentioned. The book was titled Notes on the State of Virginia. Notes contained Jefferson's observations on climate, the topography of rivers, mountains, and seaports, and he even has suggestions on manners. Jefferson wrote it mainly because he was trying to discredit his nemesis, and it's guaranteed I will say this incorrectly throughout the video, Georges Louis Leclerc, Comte de Buffon, who from here on out, I think I'll just call him George. George, like Jefferson, also liked to measure things like camels, antelopes, and ocelots. In a way, Jefferson and George were very similar. However, George also had quite the size fixation. He was mostly fascinated by Europe and Africa's largest animals: elephants, giraffes, wolves, lynx, lions, and tigers. Then George started looking at America's animals. He knew of no gigantic elephants. The largest animal was the tapir found in South America, which only came up to the tip of an elephant's tail. The biggest cat was the cougar, but a lion would rip a cougar to shreds. Sheep in America were also inferior, and George concluded that's why lamb tastes better in Paris. He even claimed that America's songbirds couldn't carry a tune. The crazy thing was George never visited America before. All his assumptions were based on what he read and what travelers to the New World told him. He described the Americas as a swampland overrun with insects and reptiles. George then developed a theory to explain why America sucked. He called it the theory of degeneracy. This theory stated that creatures living in America degenerate or go backwards in evolution. He blamed it on America having too much humidity, swamps, and insects. George then took his theory of degeneracy a step further. He wrote that not only were America's animals small and weak compared to animals in the rest of the world, but its people were too. He called America a land best suited for insects, reptiles, and feeble men. George was not the first philosopher who asserted America's inhabitant degeneracy, but he was the most well-read and influential. In the day, anything that lessened the public opinion of America, awash in foreign debt, at war with a global superpower, supplicant to the throne of France and Spain, had political significance. The old world had very little respect for people from the new world, and George's encyclopedia was taken by heart. People believed what the books said. Other philosophers also agreed with George and wrote similar books supporting his theory of degeneracy. They warned Europeans not to travel to America because it would make them weak. School books were rewritten, teaching children that America caused animals and men to become smaller over time. One even claimed that dogs stop barking when they arrive in America. Of course, none of this was true, but people believed him, and his book, Histoire Naturelle, probably didn't say that right either, which became the first zoology bestseller. The King of France even ordered copies and erected a statue of George to honor him. Certainly someone from the New World had to step up and do something about this. When Thomas Jefferson read George's Histoire Naturelle, he wasn't very happy. Jefferson knew that this was terrible news for a new country trying to get established. No other country would want to trade goods or loan money to a bunch of degenerates, and no one would want to immigrate to a country that made men and women weak. America was young, and she needed money, trade, and above all, people. The secretary to the French delegation in Philadelphia was, and again, not going to say this right, Francois Marquis de Barbe Marbois. You know what? We're going to call him Francois. Yeah. The French government, on the instructions of George, had instructed Francois to assemble data on the 13 colonies, and he responded by preparing a 22-point questionnaire. A copy of this survey was given to Joseph Jones, a name I can pronounce, and also a delegate from Virginia to the Continental Congress in Philadelphia in late 1780. Jones realized that Jefferson would be the best person to respond. Whereas other states sent in replies of a few pages, Jefferson's response became a book in which he distilled all his knowledge of Virginia's political and constitutional history, geography, ethnography, and the whole country's natural history. He also rebutted specific points from Histoire Naturelle, using all his rhetorical skills. Jefferson destroyed George's case for American inferiority. One example is where Jefferson informed George that the American black bear was 412 pounds, where the European bear was only 153. He also noted that the American beaver was 45 pounds, but the European beaver was only 18 pounds. Take that, Europe. We got bigger beavers. He measures the bones of a prehistoric mastodon found in Kentucky and found that they were a third larger than the Asian elephant. Jefferson believed at the time that the mastodon still existed in America, but it doesn't really matter. Surely a gigantic mastodon would impress George and the French, but it did not. Finally, Jefferson knew of only one animal that could prove that America didn't have a bunch of weak, tiny mammals, slimy reptiles, and bad presidents, as well as pronounceable names. Jefferson would send George an Alces, otherwise known as a moose. I just wanted to say Alces. He had only one problem. He had to find a moose. So Jefferson asked his friends in Vermont to shoot the most splendid, majestic, badass moose they could find. They didn't do such a great job, however. His buddies shot a moose and then dragged it over miles of deep snow, and by the time the moose was stuffed and ready to be shipped, it had lost half its skin and antlers. The moose was just a sad, putrid mess. But when life gives you a misshapen moose, you just stick new antlers on its head, stuff it in a box, and hope for the best. That's what Jefferson did. Unfortunately, it took over a year for the taxidermied moose to reach Paris because it got lost in the mail. In those days, it would take days or even weeks for goods to cross the Atlantic. The moose eventually reached its destination, however, and despite its pathetic condition, Jefferson was ecstatic. He immediately sent the moose to George. Jefferson later learned the moose had changed George's mind, and George had agreed to republish Histoire Naturelle. It is uncertain whether the dead moose was the only reason that changed George's mind, but I'd like to think it was. Here's an impressive and semi-related quote from Jefferson. "In war we have produced a Washington, in physics we have produced a Franklin, than whom no one of the present age has made more important discoveries, and we have supposed Mr. Rittenhouse second to no astronomer living." That's referring to David Rittenhouse, who is a Philadelphia astronomer, instrument craftsman, and patriot. Jefferson threw a big feast. He liked throwing parties and invited all his friends to celebrate America's first moose representative. Unfortunately, George died before he could republish Histoire Naturelle, but other European authors took up the cause to debunk the degeneracy theory, and America was thankfully saved by the moose. Benjamin Franklin's own response to the issue of American degeneracy was typically pragmatic, and worth mentioning here in my opinion. At a dinner party in Paris where a number of Americans were present and who, he noted, were quite tall, he asked them to rise, followed by the French, over whom the Americans towered. Adding spice to the occasion, Abbé Raynal, also probably pronounced wrong, who was one of the writers who published books rehearsing and extending George's ideas, was one of those vertically challenged French guests. Franklin graciously noted that the Frenchman was also not very tall. Today, although the bald eagle is flashier, it is the humble moose that saved America's reputation. Perhaps we should remember this story next time we choose style over substance. Long live the moose. What's your thoughts on this incredible story? Let me know in the comments below. If you like this video, please hit the like button, pet the subscribe button, and tickle the bell icon. And please check out some of my other videos that are soon to follow. Thanks for watching.